talk about Anglo-American relations today rather than wine. You might either be pleased or disappointed to hear. You will also possibly think that you can predict what I'm going to say from my accent. You can't. I came over here as a student to Oxford and just never went back, as it were. But I still have an American passport, so you can't place me in the way that you might think you can. At least I hope you can't. What I want to talk about is what is the Anglo-American relationship? Where does it come from? What constitutes it as a relationship, as an official relationship, as opposed to do we love Coca-Cola or something? And essentially what it is now, where it might be going. Although I won't predict, because I suspect I would be almost as good as the Met doing its long-range forecasts. You can't really, things develop and the center sometimes doesn't hold and so forth. But everyone knows about the relationship since 1945, but it didn't leap out of Jove's head, as it were. You know about the revolution and all that sort of thing. The American colonies meandering their way away from the British was the end of the so-called First British Empire and the beginning of a divergence. What people forget is that all during the 19th century, for example, the United States was still essentially, in many respects, a colony of Great Britain. It was an economic colony, it was an intellectual colony, it was a social colony. And so where it really becomes interesting when the two countries start to come together is really 1900, circa 1900. If you think of what they were both like in 1900, you have got the superpower. You've got Great Britain, United Kingdom, British Empire, with the greatest empire the world has ever known. Something on the order, if I remember my numbers correctly, 20% of the world's surface, 25% of the world's population was under the direct or indirect control of Great Britain. It was a superpower. And the United States was a non-servile dependent. By 1945, for various reasons, you've got the reverse. But what is also interesting, I think, is that it's probably the only time in history when the torch of dominant power is passed from one country to another without a battle between them being fought. So the power of the two countries in 1900 is not just the empire for Britain, of course. It's also the pound sterling, which was the international currency, that is to say standard of value. Americans sending their cotton to market, denominated in pounds, selling Argentinian beef, invoiced in pounds, supported by the City of London, which financed, in many respects, the world, one might say. So you had, and of course the Royal Navy, which not only prevented invasion of the home islands, because the single most important duty of any government is the defense of the realm, but also protected the sea lanes, both to colonies, of course, and to their markets. And no one could really challenge any of that. The United States at that time was very rich, they had their own industrial revolution at the end of the final third of the 19th century. By 1910, the United States produced more steel than all of Europe combined. And of course, steel is a key to military prowess. But it was only a potential great power. You read in a lot of American books about the rise of America to great powers and so forth. What it had, and what it, in fact, was the resources, but not the sustained will. No will to sustained power. And you don't really get this in the United States till 1945 and thereafter. So what you've got in 1900 is the great power, the supreme power in the world, international power, and the rich but non-acting power. First World War changes this for one simple reason, which is that the United Kingdom and the United States changed their positions as supreme financial powers. Britain was the supreme financial power in 1914. By 1918, it's the United States. And all sorts of things flow from that. Power flows from that. It's not only that you need power to have a foreign policy or defense policy. Britain and the United States both subsidized allies, subsidized other armies. And Britain, in essence, loses this power. So, and then in the interwar period then, you've got a period of not conflict so much, controversy and cooperation, depending on what's happened. What Britain wants is the United States to be a great power. There are problems out there. There are European problems. There are problems in the Far East with Japan. There are all sorts of problems. And what she wants the United States to do is to take on the responsibilities of being a great power. But the United States doesn't really want to. It doesn't know in a funny sort of way whether it's American to do this. There is isolation, but it's isolation from Europe. It's not isolation from other parts of the world. But it's isolation in the sense that the United States had decided that it had been a mistake to go in the First World War. Is it a mistake? Is it even American to act for these sorts of things outside of America? And so you have, during the interwar period, ideas changing in the United States, but changing effectively by outside pressure. The United States was torpedoed into the First World War, and it was bombed into the Second World War. And I myself have grave doubts about whether the United States would have entered of either of those wars if they had not been attacked. So the question is then, is it going to develop into a great power in the way that Britain wants? So it'll be a help. Britain wants America as an ally. The United States doesn't want any allies. And of course, this changes with the Second World War. They have to work together for fairly obvious reasons. They've got the same enemies. And it's only about 1943 that positions change. Until 1943, Britain essentially has more forces in the war than the United States does. But once 1943, you start seeing the tipping. And by 1945, no one is in any doubt about what is the supreme power. So, what is the relationship going to be like in 1945? And that's a real question. For Britain, she sees it as absolutely critical, crucial to her own safety. There's a document in the Public Record Office, which is essentially the assessment of a group of senior civil servants in 1949, about what the position of Britain is going to be. What does she need? And the summary is that it is vital to Britain that she have a special relationship, and that term is used, I have doubts about that term, which I'll mention in a minute, that it's vital she has a special relationship with the United States and with Canada, interestingly, because she can't depend on Europe. Europe is not safe, and only having Europe as allies is not safe. She has to have the support of the United States. And if you're going to be an ally, and especially an ally of a stronger power, you have to be a dependable ally. And probably the single most important foreign policy of the British government since 1945 is to be a dependable ally for the United States. This sort of childish approach, whether a British Prime Minister is a poodle of the United States, as far as I'm concerned, betrays a profound lack of understanding about the relationship between two countries, or in particular the relationship between Great Britain and the United States. That there's a lot more complexity involved, and there's a lot more involved in terms of safety. Now, what then are the bones of the Anglo-American relationship since 45? Various things. In terms of what links the two together as an alliance, not as a sort of a cuddling relationship of any sort, are two things. One is the nuclear relationship, and the other is the intelligence relationship. Nuclear relationship dates from 1940-41. Scientists domiciled in Britain, interesting word nowadays, especially this past week, living in Britain, refugees, invented the bomb, wrote a memorandum saying how it could be built. Whilst the United States was still neutral, Churchill turned this memorandum over, it's called the Frisch-Perels Memorandum, turned it over to the Americans. The Americans took over the building of a bomb. And agreements during the Second World War said that they would continue to exchange information, and neither country would use it without the permission of the other. Well, by the end of the war, this was not carried out by the Americans. They decided it was necessary that they keep control of the bomb, not only for power, but also because they didn't want it to. They thought that was a way, various scientists thought that was a way to control any sort of proliferation. Britain was outraged, incandescent with rage, and it was decided fairly early on then, by 1947, that they had to have an atomic bomb. Now, they had to have an atomic bomb, it seems to me, for two major reasons. First of all, if you're a middle-sized country, but with technological prowess, and your major opponent is likely to be the Soviet Union, you can't beat them, but perhaps you can deter them. So if you have a bomb, they are likely to be deterred from actually attacking you. That was one hope. After all, if you're depending on another country, say the United States, will they exchange Chicago for London? And secondly, of course, the bomb was developed against an ally. It was developed against the United States, partly because of the Chicago-London conundrum, but partly so that the United States would see Britain as someone who could contribute so that America would take account of British desires and preoccupations and not just dismiss them. Because Britain not only had something to contribute to an alliance, but because it would actually be able to go its own way. The second thing is the intelligence relationship. And this, again, Britain started out as by far better than the United States. The British MI5, MI6 was taken as the pattern for the American development of their own relationship. As you all know, during the war, it was very close. Britain took care of German decrypts, America took care of Japanese decrypts. And this has actually continued. Signal intelligence, SIGINT, is really more the responsibility of the Americans because they're a lot wealthier. Britain is rather better, it seems, in human intelligence, in HUMINT. So they have an advantage there. But it comes together, along with Australia, New Zealand, Canada, in a worldwide organization for listening to signals of all sorts. Every time you send an email or make a mobile phone call, you can be listened to. That's what Cheltenham's all about. And this is organized between primarily the United Kingdom and the United States. And thirdly, of course, one has to think of the language. Whether this is important or not, of course it is important when you've got two countries that are fundamentally monolingual. They have to have someone to talk to. Bismarck made a very interesting comment in 1898 when he said that the most important fact in the modern world is that the North Americans speak English. In other words, the foundation is there for a unified power that will be, as far as he could see, predominant for as far as one could see. So the question is by now, is there a special relationship? What is likely to happen to it? Now, I think special relationship is a very dangerous concept. I think the term special relationship is for weaker powers, because those who are dominant don't need to use it, do they? So therefore, every time there's a call that they have a special relationship, the one person who will not use the term is a British diplomat. He's not stupid. He or she knows that using this puts them in a supplicating position, and that's no way to face a negotiating partner. So therefore, whether there is going to be a continuing Anglo-American relationship is up to various things. Can Britain still contribute? She has been the main military ally of of the United States, because Britain has traditionally been, you lot all think you're gardeners. You're not, you're warriors. I mean, that's the sort of the drive for the past n number of centuries in Britain. You will fight, and on the whole, you will fight well. So every time the Americans have war plans, which more or less assumes Britain is going to be fighting next to them, as long as that continues, Britain will be a valuable ally. Europe, who knows? It may be, it's very much changed. Perhaps Britain will sooner rather than later decide that the costs of being an international ally are too great. It's better to be wholly a regional power. But I think some sort of important relationship will continue for some time. These things take time to wind down, and almost generations have to change, I think, before assumptions that are implicated change. Thanks.